Okay, we are live. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today to today's EstesGroup and Conversation event. I'm Brad Feakes, and I'm the president of EstesGroup. And in celebration of EstesGroup's 20th anniversary, we're conducting a series of conversations with some of the friends and colleagues we've met along the way. My guest today is Sam Oshay, founder and CEO of Recurrency. Recurrency is known to be an ERP solution that is built by distributors for distributors. Now, Sam, he comes from a multi-generational distribution family. Frustrated with the limitations of his enterprise resource planning or ERP system to address the needs of the family business, he founded Recurrency, initially to close the family gaps, and has worked since to solve problems in the distribution world for a broad array of customers. So today, I wanted to sit down with Sam and discuss his life, his career, his journey with Recurrency, and the road ahead. And with that, thank you for joining me today, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So let's start off with your background a little bit. Third generation distribution family. What has that done to set you on your course with Recurrency?
Absolutely. So, the story writes itself. My grandfather came to America in the 1940s and initially started working at a hardware store in Los Angeles. And about 10 years into his time at the hardware store, he got into a disagreement with the owner, ended up going down the street, starting his own hardware business. The original one is no longer there, but his business still is. And from generation to generation, as most distribution businesses go, my dad and my uncle took over that family business, grew it for the next 40 years, and then I came up as the next generation in the family business, and one particularly interested in technology. Went and got my computer science degree, and I was looking around the business and talking to every single person to understand what were the problems in the organization that most needed to be solved, and everything came back to the ERP system as the central source of truth, the central data model on which the business operates. It is the state of the business, right? The state of the business is enshrined in your ERP database. And so the issues with reading that data, interpreting that data, updating that data, creating new data, those are ultimately the problems that prevent the state of the business from progressing forward. And so I ultimately made my sort of stack rank of the most important problems. And I went and looked at other ERP vendors of whether there was a new platform that we could rip and replace onto, of whether there were point solutions that we could go and buy. And through all that exploration, I slowly realized that there really wasn't anything out there that was easy to implement, i.e., you could implement it one department at a time. You didn't have to rip and replace and break the whole business all at once, right? You could work on sales today and purchasing next month. There's nothing that was one at a time, a la carte. And then B, the things that were a la carte weren't integrated with the ERP natively and weren't integrated with each other. There were all these sort of like CSV up, CSV down craziness. That meant that that state of the business was fragmented across various systems, and you'd be on this crazy goose chase to trace down, every data point in the business and make sure it's in sync with one another. And so those were these two limitations I came into in the market through my family business experience. That the state of the business is in the ERP, but there is no way to improve it without breaking the entire state all at once. There's nothing a la carte. And then second, there's nothing integrated. And so I started Recurrency specifically to hit those 2 points. I want to be able to provide people and ultimately have my family business obtain a la carte automation solutions. We want to be able to work on sales today, purchasing tomorrow, inventory management next week, right? Work on one thing at a time, incrementally improve the business without breaking the whole thing, while at the same time ensuring that that state of the business, that single source of truth, is unbroken, right? It's not that we're importing the data into this system and now there are two parallel sources of truth. No, there's just one ERP database, one general ledger, one order data type, one inventory list, and all the data rolled downhill towards it. And ultimately, that's what we built at Recurrency. And I guess we can go deeper into integration and talk more about the product, but I'll give it back to you, Brad.
Well, nice, nice. I mean, I like the idea of a la carte modularized solutions. A la carte always gets me hungry for dim sum, but in central
Sure.
Wisconsin, I mean, you're in San Francisco, so you got dim sum falling, out of the gutters. Me, I have to go for a pretty long drive to get any authentic. But I like the fact too, the idea of CSV up, CSV down. It seems when we talk about integrations, and then you integrate a solution only to realize that you've created a greater degree of fragmentation in so doing. So that'll be
Yes.
really interesting to dig into a little bit. But about those challenges you talked about, what do you think some of the key challenges right now are facing modern distributors with regard to their ERP system or the market in general? And have they changed since your grandfather first entered the distribution world?
So it's interesting having grown up in the distribution family business, because my point of view on the business is probably different than if I had, say, worked my way up and was sort of, working at a distributor. Where for me, it was looking at the financials and then hearing from the customers, right? Because ultimately, the higher you go in an organization, your whole day becomes about financials, recruiting, and customers. Those are really the three things that if you hear, unhappiness or see things going wrong, and those are your early warning systems for something more, insidious going on in your business. And from the customer perspective of my family business, they want to be able to purchase a broad selection of inventory at fair prices, geographically appropriately, so they can pick it up anywhere or get it delivered within 24 hours. Right? That's what they want. They want fast delivery, low prices, broad selection, as Jeff Bezos would always say. And if you look at the problems in the ERP, they manifest in all of those things, right? If you have extremely manual processes, you have higher costs, and so you cannot offer a fairer price. If you have really broad selection, all of a sudden manual processes start to break, because you can do it for maybe 1,000 SKUs, but you can't do it for 100,000 SKUs. And then ultimately, the optimization problem of how do you take your millions in inventory and allocate it across 10, 20, 30 branches, that's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. And if you don't have strong software systems helping you make those human decisions, you will have improperly allocated inventory, which will manifest itself in customer dissatisfaction. And so if you look at what do customers care most about, it tends to be about inventory. It's like, I want my broad selection, I want them in the right places so I can pick them up, and I want the business to operate in a highly efficient way so that I can have a fair price, a market price. That I shouldn't be paying, I as a customer shouldn't be paying to cover overhead that you only incurred because of poor management and poor systems, right?
Sure.
The better run distributor has the customers on their side. And then if you look at the P&L, you look at the balance sheet, the most important line item on every distributor's balance sheet is inventory. It's like 60 to 70% of assets at the minimum for any stocking distributor. And the optimization problem of, I have my 10,000 SKUs and my 10 branches, my 100,000 item locations. How do I allocate my inventory across those locations? That was always the biggest problem. That is like the most important problem to be solved in distribution, because it is upstream of everything. If you don't have it in the right location, you can't really sell it, right? If you can't really sell it, you don't really get customers. If you lose customers on one item one time, they'll find another distributor, and probably you'll lose other business as well. So the cost of a lost order is far more than just, one PO. It's ultimately the relationship. And so I was particularly interested in building demand planning and purchasing solutions, right? How can we make sure that the inventory allocations are optimized? We can talk more about my background, but when I was at Penn, I was so deeply interested in all the machine learning, artificial intelligence work. And the way Recurrency actually got started is I was off at Penn, and I had sort of accelerated along my CS career. I was a sophomore at Penn, and I was doing the PhD level AI classes. And we were talking about multi-armed bandit problems, which is the sort of fancy PhD way of saying price optimization. And price optimization is deeply, deeply tied to inventory allocation, right? Because price informs demand oftentimes. And I came home for the summer and was sort of hanging around at my family business. And I thought to myself, hedge funds in New York, they have, billions of dollars of R&D invested. They spend, millions and millions of dollars a year on like these PhD AI people to go build out trading models to optimize the way they allocate their portfolios, right, into stocks, into, futures, into securities, in this like giant multi-trillion-dollar market of securities. But then distributors are also playing in this like highly liquid multi-trillion-dollar market. They're just not securitized, right? But they're selling these, oftentimes commoditized goods in this huge market. And there's like absolutely zero spending in those optimizations at all.
Wow.
Right. And so it was so interesting to me that it was, if you look at like Wall Street in the 1960s and 70s, there was zero of this sort of AI automated computation at all. And it was sort of introduced, through, Jim Simon's Renaissance technologies in like the 1970s. And that's like the dominant way that people trade today. It's like completely computers. When you go and you trade on your portfolio, you're like trading against like some algorithm some like PhD gold medalist wrote, which is like, kind of worrisome. But in distribution, it's like all spreadsheets. And so I think there was this parallel in my mind of distribution today to like Wall Street in the 1970s. And I imagine in 50 years, all of distribution will be, just like algorithms running, buying and selling goods in this global, multi-trillion-dollar global marketplace.
Right. Still a lot of tribal knowledge and hunches on where to stick stuff based on past experience and loose approximations of how much you've done here versus there and such. That's
Yeah.
intriguing. It's funny because last week I was talking with Uni Bryant to Rubber Tree, and we were talking a little bit because we both have some background in distribution and in manufacturing, and we're talking about some of the differences and similarities between the two industries, and that seems to be, to me, as we talk now, the single biggest difference in distribution versus manufacturing. That idea of branch allocation is a problem that manufacturers just don't really fathom. I can't think of a manufacturer that has really had that kind of problem
Yeah, they
to
don't
the
have to deal
degree.
with it.
No, really, it's from their point, they have that single source of genesis, and it goes outwards. Whereas there's all kinds of crosstalk in the distribution world, and I imagine the decisions that you make on sticking it in one place versus another can have huge, bottom line implications.
Yeah, and I think the complexity of the distribution network, when you sort of study it in a textbook manner, it's actually, way larger than people think. So imagine, you're a distributor and you're growing, you have 3, 4 branches. You probably have a purchaser in every branch, and they're buying and selling into every branch individually. And every branch is kind of like its own little island, right? And then, maybe you get, a 5th warehouse, and it's like way bigger, and it's sort of like geographically in the center, and it's probably near a port. And you say, well, maybe we can, lower our total landed cost by merging our branch orders, which are maybe half containers, into full containers, and do a sort of like hub and spoke style purchasing. Now, from a mathematical perspective, and I love this stuff, and so forgive me if it's too boring.
Not at all.
There's so many advantages to doing hub and spoke, because for your long tail of items, those 80% of long tail items that everyone struggles with, right? How do I stock my C and D items, right? If you look at your demand for your C and D items, the reason they're hard to stock is because they're hard to forecast, because you don't have a lot of data. They only sell like 3 or 4 times a year. But if you take 5 branches and you say, well, it sells 3 or 4 times a year times 5 branches, now it sells 15 to 20 times a year. That's actually a lot of data to make a forecast. You have a lot lower variance in your demand forecast. And so if you order into the hub and pool that demand, you can actually carry less safety stock, right? Because you have a better idea of what you're going to sell. And that lower safety stock obviously frees up cash for you to invest in high turnover items, ultimately improving the overall capital efficiency of the business, the return on assets of the business. And so as your distribution business grows, you have to embrace these more and more complicated models. And so that's a very simple example, but imagine you now have 100 branches, and you have 10 of them are your hubs and 90 of them are your spokes. I want to order an item. Into which hub do I put it? Maybe for this item, all my customers are like geographically different from my other customers. And so maybe this spoke, we should actually treat it as a hub, but only for these items. And when you think about just the permutations, the hundreds of thousands of millions of ways to actually stock and distribute these items, to figure out which of these is the lowest cost, right? It is a problem that literally you cannot do by hand. It is impossible to do in a spreadsheet. And so there's a lot of tribal knowledge, and people do this by hand. And it's amazing to me that people actually seem to know so much about their network, right? And tribal knowledge is not to be discounted. I think, our philosophy towards artificial intelligence is we never want to replace the purchaser. We want to just take all those textbook calculations that aren't being done and just do them automatically and present to them the sort of like textbook right answer. And the purchaser who has those decades of tribal knowledge, they'll be able to know whether it's right, whether it's wrong, and whether or not their initial opinion was right or wrong. Right? The way I see it is, if the purchaser is, right 90% of the time and wrong 10% of the time, and the AI is right 90% of the time and wrong 10% of the time, right? Together, both of them, they'll be wrong like 1% of the time and right 99% of the time. And so it's the pickup of having 2 layers of review. But now I'm ranting. Back to you, Brad.
No, that's awesome. It's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking about how Walmart took over the world 30 years ago by figuring out cross-docking. And it sounds like when we talk about hub and spoke that there's still a lot of distributors 30 years later who are trying to figure out those basic principles. So it's interesting to see kind of how your product might be still just catching people up to what kind of communal lessons have been learned up until this point. But I like the fact that you mentioned Pennsylvania. So, let's talk a little bit about your life before Recurrency and your education in Pennsylvania. Certainly, it seems like a computer science education was the perfect tailoring for your life to come. But how did your perspective on the family business change after you returned from college?
Yeah. So at the University of Pennsylvania, the reason I chose that school is because there's this amazing dual degree program there called the Jerome Fisher Program in Management and Technology, M&T, Management and Technology. And Penn has 4 undergraduate schools: the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Engineering, the Wharton School, which is the business school, and then a nursing school. And why I chose M&T was because I could get both a business degree from Wharton and an engineering degree from the School of Engineering in 4 years. That was why I chose it. And it was an amazing program. Some of the best friends I have in my life, the director, Gad Allen, he's actually like an advisor to Recurrency. He comes in and gives talks on inventory allocation and demand pooling, all that stuff I just talked about. And so maybe he'd see this and be proud. But so I loved Penn. And I learned so much about Penn. And the question of how did my perspective on the family business change? I think what I learned is that there is the textbook way of how you run these complex operations. And then there's the reality on the day-to-day, on the ground, of how does it actually work? And what I saw was my family business on the day-to-day, like, it's a working business, right? They have everything under control. They have a good system. But it was so far from the textbook. And for me, I came back wondering, if you were to take those textbook principles and implement them alongside all that, the real world day to day, like, how would the business change? And I think a couple years later, it's one of the great prides of my life to say that I actually built that system, and now I know what would change, which is, there's a 20%, change in inventory that you can that you free up. You can free up 20% of inventory and reinvest that capital into the business, into web initiatives, into more inventory that turns over quicker. And so I think my perspective on the family business is that over time, people develop their ways of working, and over time the state of the art on sort of how you should run at least some of these like quantitative systems changes, and that they just drift very far apart over time, and that from time to time implementing them is good. That's a very hand wavy answer, Brett.
Well, was it challenge to your family business when this hot young kid with a big degree comes in and starts trying to turn the knobs? Was there resistance? Was it a challenge? Were there some aha moments along the way? How does that work?
I think that ultimately it's all just suggestion, right? The way you influence an organization that's deeply rooted in its day-to-day, operations, that doesn't, like to change, right? I think my family business is actually very amenable to change, but for some of our customers who are less amenable to change, the power of suggestion is very strong, right? Where if you come in and you say, you know what, I have this fancy degree and here's my textbook and you're doing this wrong, obviously you're going to alienate everyone. But if you say, hey, so we're really invested in lowering our inventory while making sure we don't spike our back orders, while making sure we're always stocked for customers. Here's this PO that your spreadsheet calculations are saying you should make. What would happen if you bought like 15 less units of this one line item? And maybe they'll go and they'll like change it, but they won't tell you. They'll just do it on their own, right? And so I think the power of suggestion is really strong, and really bringing people along, and making sure goals are aligned and making them the hero of the story is it's very important. There's an art to onboarding and change management.
Sure, I can imagine. I can imagine those would be good lessons learned once you've sold the software to a given organization. We were talking the other week about how sometimes the people who buy a solution and the people who are actually implementing it are different people. So when you sell the solution, you're talking to person A and they sign the dotted line. Now you have to come in and implement with some folks who might just be in the trenches, and their level of skepticism might be very different than the people who actually brought you in to begin with. So I imagine that kind of give and take is helpful there.
So we actually plan our product roadmap, what we build, around this exact problem, where for everything we release, every screen in the product, our philosophy is there needs to be 2 distinct ROI arguments. One is a high-level financial ROI. By implementing recurrency demand forecasting, you can lower your safety stock and free up $8 million from your inventory. There needs to be an absolutely succinct, quantitative, undeniable financial ROI argument that we can present to a CFO or an executive buyer. One that, if you just follow the logic, it's indisputable, right? Something that our product 100% can deliver on, that's objective, right? Every screen needs that ROI argument, because if there isn't an ROI, why would we build it? Mm-hmm. But in addition, there also needs to be an absolute, indisputable, slightly more qualitative workflow argument, which is from the perspective of the front end user, who maybe doesn't actually have any equity in the business or skin in the game and won't see any of those inventory improvements in their paycheck, right? They should derive joy from using Recurrency. I was at a customer on site in Rochester, Minnesota, with one of the purchasers who use Recurrency day to day, and I said, "Does Recurrency bring you joy?" And she says, "Absolutely. I would never want to use Profit 21 as long as I live." Right. And I think that's what we strive for, is that we should be able to show the product to people, and even the frontline workers, right, who aren't, really seeing part of that financial ROI, right? They should just love using the system. It should be a pain in their day to go back into their legacy ERP system or to go back into spreadsheets. And I think for us, the mark of a successful implementation is when customers request features from us, not because our product is incomplete, but because there are other workflows that they do in the ERP that they don't want to do in the ERP anymore, and they just want to be able to do in Recurrency, because
you got them excited, and now they want to spread the wealth.
Yeah, that's our philosophy. And so you're right. The people who buy the software and the people who use and implement the software are different. And in our mind, we need to be able to win both of those constituencies 100%, either through a strong financial ROI or through just user love. Right? They should just love the software so much. It should just be way easier for them. And so all these quality of life features really matter. I know, for example, on the purchasing side, we have this contextual side panel. So one thing that people hate is going into like 10 different screens in their ERP to try and make a decision, to go and have to look up their units of measure here, to go look up all their vendor list here, to look up all their last PO costs here, right? To go get their net stock here. They hate going to like 10 different screens. And so putting them all on the side panel, that whenever you click on something, it will give you all the details, all the data right there, right? That's just this incredible quality of life feature that, really people use Recurrency because they love it so much. And that's just like not in the ERP. And ultimately, that's not a financial feature. That's like a UI design feature. And maybe we can say, oh, well, you'll save time. But ultimately, time savings is not the strongest ROI argument. The better ROI argument is about free cash flow and inventory optimization.
Right. And then I love the idea of leading with the why, as to why you're approaching this implementation and doing these things, that people immediately understand there's a value statement to what they're all doing. It's not just a series of steps they're following. It's they're doing this process to achieve this end, and that's an end that is very tangible to them in terms of making my life easier, reducing frustration levels, reducing the manual stuff that takes no brains at all to do. I love that.
Yeah. Happy customers, happy employees, happy business.
Sure. That's a good thing. Let's take a quick detour then from the economic to the political. Now, when we were prepping for our conversation, I ran across this site called On the Ideal State, in which you were purported to be the founder and editor-in-chief, and listening to some of the interviews of some really sharp folks. That was a lot of fun. How did that project come about?
Yeah. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I was shocked when you brought this up on the backstage, because I haven't heard those words in years. But back when I was a sophomore in high school, I did a summer program in economics, and I was so interested in economic theory and economic history that I did this 52-week reading challenge, where I wanted to read a book a week every week for a year, of sort of like all the great economic books written through history, all the stuff you study, in school, to really understand the source material. And I did this for a year. And I learned so much. It was really foundational in my education. And something I realized is there was no artifact that I did this work, right? I had put all this time and energy into it, and I feel like I had developed as this person. But I had no artifact. There's nothing I could point to and say, you know what, I read all those books, and I have all this knowledge, and I can talk about all these things. There's no artifact of it. And so I started emailing a lot of the authors, at least the ones that were living, saying, hey, I read your book and I really liked it. I'm like some random high school student. Can I take you to coffee? Can I take you to lunch? And if you're some big shot, professor or author, you don't want to go to lunch with some high school student. No one wanted to do it. And at that time, podcasting was like, this really hot topic. And so I thought that, let me just see, I'll just say, oh, I have a podcast. Do you want to come on my podcast? And it's going to be the same conversation we'd have at lunch. I'd just record it. And then I'd have an artifact. I can put it online. And I sent a batch of 10 cold emails and went to sleep and woke up and like 8 people had responded and said they wanted to be on my podcast. So I drove down to Guitar Center and I picked up some microphones and some recording equipment and I set it all up on my kitchen table. And I remember interviewing my dad as like the test and like asking him all these questions and making sure the audio sounded correct. And then all of a sudden I had a podcast and I was recording these episodes, putting them online. I remember I'd email professors I liked as well and ask them if I could publish essays. And all of a sudden, for a couple of months, I had this like economics podcast going. And it was really interesting and actually had a meaningful viewership. I remember looking at the numbers in the back end. It was actually like a lot of people.
Nice.
It was like a fun high school project. And I don't know what the takeaway is, but maybe it was something about having artifacts of the phases of your life or the work that you've done, or maybe the entrepreneurial spirit of being a young high schooler who wanted to talk to the provost of the University of Chicago, or Richard Epstein, some of these sort of like famous professors.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. If you ever get bored with recurrency and pick it up, I think you should try to reach out to Thomas Sowell while you still can.
So I actually have a very good friend of mine, and we were talking one night, and we were saying, it's so interesting. People don't make statues anymore, right? It seems the only statues that we're making nowadays are of like these famous sports figures going in front of Staples Center or something like that. Those are the only places we actually see statues going up. And then we were talking about, if we had the budget, right? Who would we want to make a statue of, right? And like Arnold Schwarzenegger was one that we were throwing around. Doing a president, Barack Obama or something like that. It just seems like there's going to be statues of them anyways. We don't have to contribute to that. And we had a friend who said, what I'd love to do is I'd love to put up a statue of Thomas Sowell at Stanford. And so he reached out to the Hoover Institute and was literally trying to get this statue of Thomas Sowell made. But it was a big political topic that people didn't want to put up the statue of Thomas Sowell. It was like an interesting side project for my friend. And so it's interesting. Yeah, I love him as well. He's one of those famous economists.
Oh yeah, he's a guy, when he opens his mouth, almost always something intriguing comes out. A Thomas Sowell statue on the West Coast, that's like having going to a vegan community and trying to open a barbecue pit. I could see where that might run into some challenges there. Let's talk a little bit about recurrency as a company. And I always found that when I talk to business owners, naming is always something that has its own backstory. So EstesGroup. We're EstesGroup because my boss, founder and CEO, he had a house in Estes Park, Colorado. So that's where everything from there came about. So no, we're not the firework company. No, we're not the freight forwarder. We're this little consultancy that happened to have a guy who really loved 8,000 feet above sea level. So tell me a little bit about Recurrency's founding.
Yeah. So the name Recurrency, this is the story. I was talking to the sales manager at one of the branches in my family business. And I said, when you come in to work, so much of distribution is about reaching out to customers, building relationships, and ensuring that you get recurring orders, right? If you're a facility supplier and you're selling stretch film to a warehouse, they're always going to need stretch film. And if they order stretch film every 6 weeks from your business, and then all of a sudden they stop ordering, it's not that they decided they didn't need stretch film anymore. It's that they probably just went with another vendor. And so, one of the jobs of the account manager or of the outside salesperson is to ensure that those recurring orders continue to occur. And I asked him, and I said, how do you know, when those recurring orders are coming? How do you know when to reach out? How do you know if you lose one? And he says, oh, well, you just look at the sales reports, and if the sales are down year over year, you can kind of tell. And I thought to myself, that seems really imprecise, and it seems really reactive, because only once you lose the customer do you know. You can't be proactive about it. And so I built this little AI algorithm that would look at the time between orders and make recommendations on when it seemed a reorder was due. And we had all these different methodologies for making these predictions. And the first MVP of Recurrency was taking that data, putting it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then emailing it out to people. That was the first version of the software. And so that was the first feature I ever really built. And so the concept was, it's so important for you to get these recurring orders. it's so important for you to get this recurring revenue. It's so important for you to get this recurring currency. It's so important for you to get this recurrency. That was the logic.
Nice.
I don't know if anyone grasped that, but it was also the domain was also available. So that was a very important one too.
That's awesome. A whole business model boiled down to a dad joke.
Absolutely.
I
Yes.
love it. I absolutely love it. So, reading about recurrency from Kent Bennett of Bessemer, he had described recurrency as a next gen SaaS solution. He called it one where the solution was not an outright replacement of an ERP, but rather a modularized layer on top. I love that idea of modularized layer on top. It makes me think of like a layer cake and some
Yep.
high carb meal that I shouldn't be eating. So, tell me about your take on next gen SaaS and the value of integrated solutions like recurrency.
Yeah. So anytime I'm on any live stream or any interview and someone brings up Kent Bennett, I got to give a Bessemer plug and say that Kent Bennett has been the best investor that I have ever worked with. I absolutely love Kent. And if you're a founder or someone out there listening, I'm happy to introduce you to Kent. You should try and get him on your board. He's one of the most helpful and supportive and knowledgeable people I ever could have partnered with for this business. And I'm just eternally grateful to him. And if I ever started a second company, he would be my first call. And so there's my plug for Kent. Now, the question about modularized layer on top, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how all of the point solutions in this industry, anyone who you look at and say, oh, well, they're a competitor to Recurrency. Either you're a rip and replace system where you have to break the business overnight, right? You have to spend a year doing trainings and onboardings and getting consultants to come in and set up all your processes in your new ERP, and then you cut over, for which everything is now broken in your business, and it takes you 6 months to a year to figure out how to fix it. Or you can buy point solutions, which are loosely integrated. They're CSV up, CSV down. And so they have delayed data, they have incomplete data, and they're ultimately the standalone source of truth that if that data sync isn't perfect, all of a sudden you're making decisions based on the wrong set of data points. And so why is Recurrency, the modularized layer cake on top of the ERP, is because we have this bidirectional real-time integration. This is our key point of differentiation, is that we can pull the broadest set of data, all the data from your ERP in real time, and also push data back to the ERP in real time. This integration takes about 15 minutes to set up. As one of our customers said, it takes half a lunch break to set up. For an IT person or an IT admin. And from there, we can deliver not just our demand planning software or our purchasing software, but our entire sales solution, our sales AI, our outside sales lookups tool, the mobile app, if you will. We have other things we're building like a payment system in beta. So we have this broad set of functionality all powered by one integration. And so the end goal for Recurrency is that you can integrate once through this absolutely seamless, magical integration that doesn't require CSV ups and CSV downs, that maintains that single source of truth in your ERP. And we can provide to you those a la carte solutions, those modularized solutions. Is the most important problem in your business demand planning? Well, we have this amazing, best in class, better than anyone else demand planning system that we can turn on with, just flipping a switch because we're already integrated. Now, we're going to work really closely with you. We're going to get that working. It's going to be amazing. If it doesn't work for you, you can always just go back to the ERP. It's purely additive. It doesn't break anything. But that's never happened because it seems to work for people. And then once you implement that, you say, well, now I actually have a problem in my purchasing department. I want to be able to double my business without scaling my purchasing headcount. Well, we have a purchasing automation solution that we can turn on just flipping a switch. And then you say, well, actually, I have needs in reporting. Well, here's a customized dashboard. Right? Oh, I have needs for my inside sales rep. So here's an inside sales tool. Just flip the switch. No integration required, no new onboarding required. The data is already there. The data model is already consistent with what you use. And because the data is consistent with what you use, it's easy to onboard. People are familiar with how the data looks, how it works. And so ultimately, that modularized layer cake, that next gen SaaS, the goal is to give distributors optionality, right? You don't have to go full commitment into a new ERP. You don't have to go into this sort of scattered web of point solutions. You can have a single integrated system that works out of the box with your existing ERP and gives you the optionality to fix one thing at a time. That's the end goal for the business.
Nice, nice. So just to get somewhat technical here, if I understand correctly, that initial sync, you're basically pulling a large portion of the base ERP's data system into memory or into Recurrency's own system, so it can be then manipulated and acted upon, as opposed to like transaction by transaction having to ping the database, the native database, to figure out what it's doing. How does that kind of operate?
Yeah, so I don't want to give away too many details, but we do have a cache layer, and so the load on the ERP database is exceptionally low, right? If you turn it on with our full sync, our real-time bidirectional sync, and you look at your graphs, your CPU utilization, your memory utilization, uh, you wouldn't even notice it,
Nice. So
right?
I imagine
We put in a ton of effort into
I,
making sure that that's the case. And we've worked with some great database consultants as well to verify that with our customers. Um, Another thing, if you're out there, we work on-prem, we work in the cloud. I guess, Brad, the majority of your customers are probably in the Prophet 21 ecosystem, right? So we work with every version of Prophet 21. We have, I think close to 100 Prophet 21 companies using Recurrency. And yeah, on the database load, we do have a cache, so we're not pinging the database every time someone loads a page.
because I think in integrations, one of the big concerns always ends up being, well, is it going to be an overall drag on performance? Is it going to be either the integration performs slowly because it's always having to do, it's real chatty, or is it more of is it going to be a drag on the base system and it works fine, but the base system now drags? But it sounds like you've managed to solve that riddle to have a snappy performing app that also isn't a burden on the base system.
Yeah, to go one more layer of detail, we have what we call hard syncs and soft syncs. The hard sync is I'm going to load your entire database over to my side. And we do these, once a month maybe, and we do them basically like Saturdays at 1 a.m., right? We do these, in the middle of the night, on the weekend, outside of business hours, when nothing is really happening and it can't break anything, right? And then from there are the soft syncs, which are those incremental syncs of the 10 POs that were made in the last hour. And those happen all the time. But because they're such small queries, they don't have an impact on performance.
Nice, nice. I imagine the data objects these days are a lot better than with ERP systems. When I started working in, this is 15 years ago, used these very large hierarchical data sets to pass back and forth. So even like client server conversation was very small. And like with JSON now, your objects are getting smaller and smaller. So I imagine those syncs we're using, more modern development methodologies allow you to try to trim a lot of that goofy stuff down and keep the fluff out.
I think the best investment as a software business you can make is in world-class engineers. And, I think the quality of our product is just a reflection of the talent of our engineering team. And I think Recurrency really just has this exceptional engineering team that I'm just so incredibly proud to work with every day.
Nice. And I imagine you have quite a broad palette to work with in the future, given that that whole idea of pulling that core data into cache, now you have all these different modularized data versions that future enhancements can be acting upon. And those new changes aren't an act of Congress, but rather it's a matter of acting upon data that you've already apportioned for use, presumably.
I think that's a huge advantage, where if you partner with Recurrency and you want to add new functionality, it's not like, a point solution that, one of our competitors provides, where now you need to upload more CSVs and more CSV downs and more data matching and data reconciliation. No, it works. It's just out of the box, native.
Nice. Nice. So when we've talked a lot about automation. Are you automating just system processes, or does Recurrency find itself also automating some of the manual processes that either precede a system process or follow up after?
So I think all of the above, right? The goal is that Recurrency can take anything that's rote and completely obviate it. So, for example, an automation in my eyes can be as simple as a new UI feature. So let me give you an example in Prophet 21, actually. I'm sure a lot of people out there have made, a big multi-line PO of 100 different line items. And they want to now create a new PO with those same line items. Believe it or not, there's actually no way to copy paste, right? You kind of have to go through and select the 100 line items over. But in Recurrency, we have a button that says copy as new PO, and it's 2 clicks instead of 2 hours. To me, that's an automation. It's this very simple UI automation that probably should be native in the system. Further, I think the automations that are, higher ROI really are about decision processes. The most important automations to be made are about recommendation, right? So going to that inventory optimization question, right now, if you want to run all that textbook math about how to allocate your inventory across your hub and spoke distribution network, you can go into P21 or go into your ERP, download, 100,000 rows to Excel. Now your computer's lagging because Excel can't hold 100,000 rows. You try and drag some demand forecast over, you do some, summing, you do some crazy Excel math for a little while. Then you get kind of your purchase requirements, and then you try and figure out, are these line items from this purchaser or from this vendor? Is this a full container? And then you go back into your ERP and pull out more items, and you say, well, what else can I buy to make it a full container? Right? You go through this like crazy process that will ultimately give you a list of POs that you can then upload to your ERP or key back into your ERP.
Nice. So you're automating not just system processes, you're automating the decision making. You're automating the tribal knowledge that a person would do if they had a calculator and a lot of time to figure that out on their own.
I would say we're not automating the decision making. We're giving you the first draft, sure. Right? We want to turn the role from a writing role into an editing role, where we can go and obviate Excel. Right? We can automate all of that. You don't need to download data. We'll take the data. We'll build the demand forecast. We'll give you your optimized min, max, lead time, safety stock, OPOQ, whatever parameters you use. We'll do that across individual locations and also across your hub and spoke. We'll roll up the demand into your hubs the way you want to configure it through your replenishment locations. We'll handle all of that logic. We'll even fill full containers. We'll even fill to prepaid freight discounts. We'll fill to a MOQs, right? And we'll just say, if you look at all the math, the way your system is configured, like this is the mathematically optimal PO. But that's not automating tribal knowledge, because once you have the mathematically perfect PO, that's actually where the tribal knowledge comes in.
Oh, nice.
Right? That's when the tribal knowledge comes and says, well, I was actually talking to the customer that buys this item, and they say that their business is booming and that they probably want to buy 20% more. And so I'm going to change that quantity. Right? Or I'm going to look at that item and I have a hunch that the price of steel is going to come down. And so I'm actually going to buy less of that now because I think I can get it at a better price in a month. Right? So once you do all that mathematical work, that's exactly when tribal knowledge has the highest leverage. And so what we're doing is we're automating the work that is like not strategic, right? That's more or less a waste of people's time to be doing because it can be done by a machine. And the reason why tribal knowledge is so important is because it can't be done by a machine no matter how hard you try.
Nice. So is there any branch in the future that takes heuristic technology and tries to layer that on top, or is really tribal knowledge that stuff that just can't find its way into the system?
I think the rate of technological change is incredible. Right? I think, in sci-fi, people talk about these crazy exponential curves of, we build some AI or something and it just takes off to infinity in terms of power. My take is that we're actually like 200 years into that process already. Like we're already living in that exponential curve, and the exponential takeoff was in like the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution. Right? We're actually living in the crazy exponential times. And so I think the rate of technological change is, it is the tidal wave that will wash us all away. And so, maybe, but in my mind, it might be 10, 20, 100 years. I have no idea.
Right.
And so do I think that, you can use some of this newer LLM technology to obviate the tribal knowledge? No, I don't think so. I don't think that that's going to happen.
Still a ways away.
Maybe will GPT-5 change that? Potentially. But maybe it's GPT-50. No idea.
Right. Well, that's fair. Now let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about, Recurrency in terms of its go-to-market. Now, as I was researching Recurrency, kind of going through your solutions, I noticed, 4 distinct use cases for the consumption of Recurrency. You had inside sales, you had field sales, you had front counter, and you had customer service. Now, I find a lot of companies in the third-party solution world, they focus a lot on product, but not as many focused on the idea of use cases. Now, I love use cases. I go back when I was first doing software development, it was RUP, Rational Unified Process. And the use case was kind of the whole idea of how this solution will actually be put into practice and consumed by the customer. So this was really intriguing that you had that kind of focus. So tell me a little bit about the use case as a marketing strategy.
Yeah, so those 4 use cases are only for our sales product. We actually also have, our purchasing product, which focuses on demand planners, purchasing, supply chain executives, ultimately the CFO. Uh, and so the way we like to go to market is to talk through these role-based solutions more broadly, not just those 4 in sales, but the 8, 10, 20 that we serve across the distributor today or in the future. Because ultimately, no one buys technology for their health, right? They buy technology for what it can do in their business on the day to day. And talking about a product and talking about a feature, it's not as tangible as if you're a demand planner and you come to work. This is exactly how your day to day will be improved because of recurrency. And so just framing it from that customer perspective, that's just our philosophy on marketing, is to be as customer centric as possible, because then it's as relatable and easy to interpret as possible.
Nice. Nice. I like that a lot. In another place, I noticed when we were looking up Recurrency, this would have been on Twitter, you had an announcement of some new funding. So for those of us working in the bootstrapped world, tell me a little bit about the process of pursuing and acquiring funding and its implications, and what does that funding mean for Recurrency in its future?
Yeah. So when I was starting Recurrency, I came to the realization that we would need to raise outside capital in order to build what we wanted to build. Because software is, a little bit of an odd business in that it takes this unbelievable level of upfront investment in order to create working production quality, enterprise quality software, just this unbelievable level of production or of investment. And until you have it, you can't really sell it. No one's going to buy your half complete, not production quality, not enterprise quality software in order to help you pay your engineers, right? And so the way I saw it is, if we were really going to build this amazing ERP platform, it was going to require some upfront investment that I could not, just fork over myself. And so I then looked to raising outside capital, and I think we're incredibly lucky that Silicon Valley exists. Right? I think the entire mechanism and community of venture capitalists and risk capital investing in new ideas. I think this is incredibly important. I think it's the envy of the world. And so I went to Silicon Valley. I guess that's where you go if you're a young person trying to start a software business. And I gave the pitch of how we're going to build this amazing product, and why people would buy it, and how it's going to solve this problem in the industry. And I think, Brad, I get a lot of calls from college students and young founders, and even some older founders who call me and say, "Well, Sam, how do I raise money for my business? How can I convince investors to invest in me?" And I think my favorite line here is that the best way to get investors to invest in you is to be a good investment, right? And so focus on the product and the customers, and really making something special happen between those two. And so my philosophy for raising capital has always been to spend time with my customers, to take their requests and their feedback seriously, to implement it in my software, to go get new customers and get their feedback and requests, and keep the product customer flywheel going. Because in the long term, the best products win with customers. And if you're winning with customers, you're a good business. And if you're a good business, it's worth investing in. And if you're worth investing in, investors are really smart people, and they'll come to that conclusion.
Nice.
Right. And so if you're a bootstrap business, how do you get funding? Basically by doing the exact same thing that a bootstrap business does, but just losing money while you do it.
That's fair. I like that. So let's turn to the larger distribution community here for a moment, because I noticed that Recurrency was a sponsor of the recent National Association of Wholesale Distributors Executive Summit. So tell me a little bit about the NAW and Recurrency's relationship with the larger distribution community.
Yeah, so there are all these amazing groups in the distribution ecosystem. There's NAW, there are affiliated distributors, which we're also a sponsor of. There's the Profit 21 Worldwide User Group. We're actually the platinum sponsor this year, which I've been trying to get for years. I think I got second place and was beaten out last year by you guys, right? Who was that? So I think I got second place last year. But we love sponsoring these community events because there's really no substitute for meeting your customers face to face, to hearing their problems, to hearing how they think about the business, and then sharing how our software, how our product can support them in their goals. And so we just absolutely love going to trade shows because there's no substitute for meeting customers face to face. Absolutely
Nice.
none. Zoom is like 1/10 the power of a site visit.
Right. What is it about the distribution community that is so collaborative? Something I've noticed as well that is a distinct difference from manufacturing and distribution. I see in distribution areas you have buyers groups, you have folks who are doing the same thing, competing with each other at the same time, collaborating at a level that I haven't seen in manufacturing. Do you have any inkling as to why that general collaborative nature is so prolific?
You know, it's interesting, and I think most industries are closed off because the competition is so high, right? Competitive dynamics is probably why people are so closed off. I think in distribution, it's interesting because it is also at the same time a very competitive industry. But if you go to a trade show and you sit down at your randomly selected table of 10 people, the odds are it's not your 10 competitors, right? The odds are, you sell HVAC equipment, and that guy sells plumbing equipment, right? And that guy sells industrial distribution, right? And, machine parts. And so I think there's this, collaboration because the business model is the same, but the product catalogs don't overlap. And so there really isn't a competitive dynamic. Now, if we sat down the 10 largest HVAC parts distributors in in the Southeast at one table, would they be as open with their business and their strategies? Probably not. But I think in distribution in particular, people want to learn, people want to share, and they feel comfortable doing so because the randomly selected group of distributors is not competitive in the way it might be if you're in, say, another industry.
Nice. Well, that's good to see. So, if you were looking at recurrency from a future state, what would be your biggest areas that you still feel you want to expand into and grow that feature set? What problems are still out there to be solved?
So I think that there are many problems still to be solved for the distributor. And for recurrency, our long-term goal is to become the one-stop shop, right? If we have the ability of integration with your ERP, it means all of our point solutions are not only integrated natively, but they're integrated with each other. And so it really wouldn't make sense for a distributor to buy 5 point solutions and build 5 integrations and go through 5 onboarding periods and 5 data testing periods. They should do all that work once and have it power 5 integrated point solutions. And so our goal long term is to go down the line in the distributor and build a module for every single person in the organization, to build a solution for every line item on the P&L and on the balance sheet. I think, very long term, we want to get into financial services. We want to be, your lender. We want to, sell you insurance, right? We want to be this one-stop shop provider for everything you need to run your business. All powered through this incredibly, powerful ERP integration. And so over time, what will you see from recurrency? Well, you'll see massive R&D investments into our existing products. Every day we are shipping new features and new functionality to our existing products to make them better. It's not like your ERP where you get updates once a year, but you never really see a change, right? We're shipping stuff like daily at recurrency, multiple times a day. And so you'll see more R&D investments into our product. You'll see more products coming out of recurrency that are packaged with one another. And because they're packaged with one another, they're incredibly easy to onboard and they're incredibly price effective because you don't have to repay for all that onboarding, right? It's just, you can just turn it on and then do training. And lastly, more broadly in the ecosystem, is we're integrating with more and more ERPs over time. Today, we only integrate with a few ERPs. We want to make our system over time completely agnostic and integrate with everything. And that to me is the path forward for recurrency. Deeper products, more ERPs. And
Nice.
I think that's a formula that we can just continue to compound and build for decades to come.
Awesome. Breadth and depth. I like it. Now, what does that take from a software development standpoint? Last week, talked a little bit with Uni Bryant about Scrum and how Rubber Tree's own development processes have evolved over time. How do you keep control of all of these activities running in parallel?
Yeah, so our entire engineering organization is optimized for maximum quality and maximum velocity. We want to go as fast as possible without compromising quality one bit, right? We never want to ship a bug. And so the way we actually optimize is we make investments into the infrastructure itself. We have 2 full-time engineers at Recurrency whose job it is to invest in systems that make our other 15 engineers more productive, right? That make, shortcuts and scripts for them so that it's as easy as possible for them to build, test, and deploy software. Now, the way we make product decisions is largely customer feedback driven. We have internal forms where every time we talk to customers, we fill out these forms with all of their requests. It goes into this one giant, massive spreadsheet. Despite all of our products and all of our initiatives, I'm a huge believer that we should only ever have one roadmap. We should always know what's coming next, a strict rank order of everything in the business. And throughout the week, anyone who has an idea can fill out the form. Anyone who talks to a customer and gets feedback can fill out the form. Anyone who talks to a prospect and hears a question about the product can fill out the form. And then we have a 2.5-hour meeting every Friday where we all hash it out and we do the strict rank ordering. And then the next thing just comes off the list and goes to the next available engineer. And so instead of running these, sort of like strict, like cycles where, every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks we make decisions, right? We're continuously reordering. And whenever an engineer finishes, they just get the next thing off the list. And so it's a little bit of a novel framework. We call it the continuous sprint. Right?
Nice.
We're on a sprint that never ends.
Oh boy, that sounds exhausting.
I think to the right people, it's incredibly invigorating to work in a high velocity environment. And then ultimately, I think we take really good care of our people. So
Good. So kind of on that note, I got a kick out of your Twitter pinned post. And you
Sure.
said, you need to build a product so good that idiots can sell it. Anything less is consulting. So as an ex-consultant, I found that warmed my heart. But tell me, and also, I do want to meet your salespeople at Recurrency at some point, give them an IQ test. But tell me a little bit about how that relates to the process of building good product.
Yeah, so the story of that tweet is I was talking to Roy Matthew, our head of sales, and we're recruiting for new sales reps at Recurrency. We're growing incredibly quickly. We're onboarding new salespeople, this month, next month, and we're interviewing, dozens and dozens of candidates, and we're really optimizing for just incredibly smart people, just incredibly sharp people to work at Recurrency. That's the Recurrency standard. Is if we can't have a sales rep who everyone can look at and talk to and really trust that they have studied the industry, can contribute knowledge about the industry to them, we failed in our recruiting. And, I was talking about how long-term, all of that consulting, right, all of that, value selling should be embedded in the product, right? It shouldn't require, some, 150 IQ salesperson to be able to articulate this incredible ROI argument using your ERP data. It should just be completely automated. We should just have like a dashboard. And over time, I was talking about how a product priority is to pull all of those best practices, all the work into the product itself. And so the kind of, the semi-controversial tweet there, I guess, is, a great product. It doesn't require, 150 IQ sales reps to sell. And, I think the point there is that great products are obvious, right? If we build a truly great product, people can look at it. They can understand the ROI. They can understand how they use it on a day-to-day. And it shouldn't require this huge effort from our side, right? Great products are obvious. And I think that's the standard we aspire to.
I like that. I like that a lot. And as I see here, we are wrapping up on the hour. So Sam, I really want to thank you for a great conversation. Really enjoyed this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brad, for having me. And, I look forward to seeing Estes at the P21 Worldwide User Group.
Yes, for sure. So one note to our viewers, an edited version of this recording will be released in due time to our YouTube feed. For those who may want to follow up on a specific topic, we'll, of course, include links to Recurrency and to Sam on those. And we will certainly be doing more of these conversations in the future. So I want to thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Sam, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brad.